Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Solar Opposites. Okay, so this episode is a Silver Cops episode. It continues the Silver Cops storyline with Glen, which is always a fun time. But yeah, this episode is, well, interesting, because essentially what happens is Glen winds up working with a group of thieves who like him, and has to hide the fact that he's a Silver Cop that he was a Silver Cop from them, which is an interesting premise for an episode. Of course, it is very interesting. But in any case, the episode does open up with a very exposition-heavy dream on Glen's head. Obviously, the episode makes it very clear that it's overly exaggerated, and that none of the things that happened in the flashbacks actually fully translate to what happened in reality. But it does go through Glen's entire backstory up until this point, about how he got shot into space, joined the Silver Cops, was framed for murder, those kinds of things. But of course, he proceeds to wake up, at which point he's greeted by an alien named Xylanol PM, which is of course a pun on Tylenol. But he then proceeds to tell Glen that he can just call him Zy, and does point out that it seems like he would have some sort of exposition-heavy dream. And of course, he proceeds to explain that he's been, he's of course been trying to just, work through some things in his head. But of course wondering why, and of course then proceeds to wonder why Glen was in the woods and at the when he found him. Of course, Glen proceeds to point out that obviously he tries to play it off as nothing happened. He's just got a fetish for trees. That's what he plays it off as. And of course, Zy decides to take him at his word and goes downstairs to chat with the rest of his crew. And of course, eventually, Glen comes downstairs and discovers that all of the other aliens that Zy hangs out with are animal themed. There's a squid lady. There's a little rodent character. There's a couple of different type variants. But of course, Zy is of course reminiscing with them about some other jobs that they've done. And of course, they are very confused and of course, Glen is very confused as to what's going on. Pointing out that he didn't ask for money and didn't want to really be rescued by them. And of course, Zy proceeds to correct them, pointing out that no, they're the good guys. But having overheard that entire conversation, Glen points out that obviously they are not, and pointing out that they're an obvious group of thieves, and are probably going to hurt him. But of course, Zy points out that yeah, all of that is true, but they aren't gonna hurt him, pointing out that there are far worse people to be rubbing elbows with. At which point, and of course, does point out that the door's open and that Glen is allowed to leave any time. And of course, Glen does immediately run out the door, but after discovering how horrible the rest of the city actually is, he comes in about 5 minutes later. And of course, Zy points out that yeah, it's a mess out there. And of course, that points out that it's a lot safer inside the Hollow House. Which of course, Glen is confused as to why they call it the Hollow House. But of course, he proceeds to bring them to the leader Skeleton, who will happily explain. And of course, Glen is confused who this Skeleton person is. And of course, we find out that Skeleton is exactly to what his name implies. He's a skeleton-based alien with a holographic skeleton. So, but of course, Skeleton proceeds to point out that that obviously the Hollow House is a place where a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life come to hang out. And he points out that regardless of what happens with all of them, they try to be a closely knit group who are obviously, there for each other and try to protect each other. But of course, he proceeds to point out that he's kind of has a big old Tommy Chong vibe to him, but he's essentially Tommy Chong the skeleton. But of course, Glen after Skeleton explains what's going. Well, I mean, that is his name, Tommy Chong Skeleton, kind of on the nose. But of course, after meeting Skeleton, Zy proceeds to bring Glen around with his group, which they do proceed to demonstrate their abilities at pickpocketing people. Immediately swiping a woman's watch and blippies, which are confirmed to be a currency on Planet Exxon. But of course, they proceed to point out that it didn't always used to be this way, and they don't like having to steal from people after robbing the person. But explains that once upon a time, the Silver Cops used to live on the entire side, but the Rafts, which are all giraffe aliens, but the Rafts took over one side, and then proceeds to explain that Silver Cops took over the other side. Which, of course, Glen blurts out that Silver Cops are the absolute worst, and he can fully understand why they suck. But of course, he doesn't explain that he used to be a former Silver Cop at this point. But he does imply that he doesn't like them very much. But of course, to this point, where sure enough, case in point, one of the Raft lady that they just robbed talks to two Silver Cops, and they immediately have to duck into an alley. And of course, having brought in a couple of blippies, they eventually discover a carnival where of course the two of the aliens with two of the Hollows with Zai's crew decide to stop and blow off some steam, which Zai agrees to, pointing out that they're already above quota, and Skeleton will be happy that they brought in so many blippies. So they proceed to go and hang out on the Bows House, and of course Glen is surprised that they're that hyper and energetic, but of course Zai points out that that's ultimately the true selves. That of course pointing out that one of them wanted to be a pro chef, but that ultimately never wound up happening because the Silver Cups took over their half of the city, and it points out that they're essentially just like children. So but does point out that they're trying to make that they want to make the city a better place, and so that they don't have to steal anymore. Which, of course, Glen fully appreciates, and does point out that that's a really noble goal. And of course, he proceeds to. Of course, it is at this point where, as they're about to, get ready to leave, the two Silver Cops from earlier, trying to investigate a lead and try to figure out who it exactly was that stole the Raft lady's money, does proceed to confront Zai. Of course, Zai immediately tells Glen that he'll handle this and to stay back. But of course, the Silver Cops are obviously pointing out that they're investigating pickpockets and wonders if he has anything to do with it. Zai, of course, lies, explaining that he would know nothing about that, but is immediately punched in the face by one of the Silver Cops, with Glen immediately coming to his aid, insisting that he didn't do anything and they had no just cause to just attack somebody out of the blue. But of course, the two Silver Cops point out that they don't very much like his attitude. Although Glen stands his ground, saying that if they want to hurt him, they're going to have to go through him. So, of course, they proceed to summon weapons to try and hurt Glen, but immediately get a call and point out that Glen got lucky. And of course, Zai, being pleased with the fact that Glen stood his ground against the Silver Cop, does decide to make him an honorary Hollow, which pointing out that he earned his hologram projector and who he wants to be on the inside. And of course, Glen doesn't realize that it means that having to actually have a holographic projector grafted onto his chest. But he does point out that it's worth it because it means that he belongs and he gets to be part of a tight-knit crew of found family, which he is happy about, because he's a big fan of Fast and the Furious, and that's the entire theme of that series. That family is strong. But of course, Glen is immediately pulled into. Of course, Glen is immediately. The year goes by and Glen is still working with Zai and his crew, and of course, Zai immediately points out that. They of course immediately are starting to point out that all the issues with Silver Cops in the city, about how they do want to make the world a better place, but they're not really going to have much of a chance. But of course, it's at this point where we find out that Glen has become quite the good pickpocket, because in between the conversations they see an easy mark, and of course Glen immediately decides to show off by stealing the lady's watch, giving it back to her for a reward, and then stealing the watch again once he's gotten the reward. Which of course he does to decide to show off, and he doesn't wind up getting caught for it, which is great. But, well, at least for him, not so much for the lady he robbed. But, Of course, they're impressed, but of course they then proceed to see a guy from another crew who is getting his ass beat by his fellow crewmates, which of course Zai points out that it's because he was working with the Silver Cops, and points out that that's ultimately what you deserve for working with them. And of course the rest of his group chime in, pointing out that obviously they hate Silver Cops and anybody who works with them. But of course Glen, trying to not so subtly imply that he used to be a Silver Cop, points out that he proceeds to explain that obviously there's a good chance that the guy didn't know that the Silver Cops were bad. But of course he's interrupted by Zai interjecting play-by-plays of the guy getting his ass beat, and very badly, they describe it in very graphic detail, but we don't actually see any of it, which is it's a funny little gag. But after deciding they're tired of watching a guy get his ass beat, do decide to wander off back to the Hollow House, where Glen proceeds to have a conversation with the rest of the members of his crew, and discovers that one of them believes he's seen a Slorpian and that their planet might get terraformed. At which point Glen points out that there's a good chance that it may not be a Slorpian, asking him if he even knows what it looks like. At which point he gives a very good description of what a Slorpian looks like, because he's seen Slorpians before. But of course one of the guys realizes that actually the guy who pointed out the Slorpian sighting realizes that maybe he didn't know what he was talking about after all. But it's at this point where Zai immediately interrupts their conversation to reveal a bag of salt, which of course he points out makes him very on edge, because he realizes that the only way to get salt is from a Silver Cop, and that means that someone in the Hollow House is working with the Silver Cops. So of course he immediately lines everybody up, and reveals a large gun that he was hoping he would never have to use. But he explains that the gun is a dermal thermometer. Essentially, what it does is that it's designed to hurt like hell. But once it goes into somebody's arm, and then proceeds to reveals that it can actually read trace amounts of silver in the blood. So like being in contact with the suits, or being in repeated contact with a Silver Cop in general. Which of course Glen realizes that he might be in trouble, because he did have relations with a Silver Cop lady before they all betrayed him. So he realizes he might be in trouble, and sure enough, Zai proceeds to go down the line, stabbing people in the arm with the tool he wants, with the tool he has, even though he gives everybody else the chance to confess, and nobody comes forward, so he's forced to stab them with it. He openly admits he didn't want to, but he has to now that nobody's coming forward. But of course, right before he gets to Glen, they hear someone let out a scream, and they immediately run upstairs to go and check out what's happening, and they find out that Skeleton has been attacked. By who, they don't really know. Only that the Skeleton's assailant had a mask on of some sort, and immediately bringing him down to medical. They do conclude that they're going to need his damage might be too severe, and there's a good that because his hologram is cracked, they're going to need to be able to afford a replacement, which of course none of them can, because they're all pickpockets. They take whatever they've got. But Skeleton proceeds to correct them, pointing out that there's one way to raise enough money, and that's to perform a big heist. Which of course they point out that Skeleton kept telling them was too dangerous, but realizing they don't have much of a choice, they do proceed to set out and then proceed to schedule a plan, pointing out that Ravs like to take a long vacations. And they point out that there's one house in particular that's going to be vacant for a month that they could easily get bloppies from, which are more expensive than blippies. They are essentially, the conversion rate is like 2,000 for every one bloppy. But and of course Glen points out that the monetary currency used on Planet X9 is very confusing. He doesn't fully understand how anybody's able to keep anything straight, especially since he's been living there for a year. But and of course, they proceed to point out that yes, they're going to have to break in. And of course, they do successfully break in, only to discover that the family is still home. Of course, the dad is immediately pissed off that these people have broken into his house to steal something. He comes downstairs. The episode makes a very good point of the fact that he's not wearing any pants, and he immediately comes downstairs with his shotgun-like weapon, which of course he proceeds to threaten the thieves with. And Glen, of course, tries to talk him down, explaining that none of them are armed, They're not trying to kill anybody. They're not trying to kill anybody or take anybody's family. They just need the money to pay for their friend's surgery. Which of course, they proceed to put. But of course, he insists that if they think they're going to take anything from him, that they got another thing coming, and they're not going to hurt his family. Even though Glen again points out that none of them are armed, they're not going to hurt his family. Of course, Zai immediately tries to hold the guy up. I'm telling him that he's just going to go back to sleep. They're going to rob his house, and nobody's going to get hurt. But of course, the guy's son points out that he's holding a salt shaker, and of course, Zai immediately drops it when he realizes he's been found out. And of course, upset about the fact that Zai has been, that Zai thought he could trick him. He immediately threatens the dirty hollows, as he puts it, with his gun, but quickly slips on the salt shaker that Zai was holding and kills himself completely by accident. But of course, now realizing that they're in trouble for manslaughter, they immediately flee the house. And of course, immediately try to go back to the Hollow House, but quickly discover that Silvercups are on their tail and they're being shot at. And of course, quickly realizing they need to escape, they immediately run up behind a barricade and try to get across the river to where it's safe. But of course, one of their own gets shot. The squid lady from that I explained earlier. And of course, Glen quickly realizing that she's in trouble and that they're not going to be that they need to go back for her. Glen immediately runs into the line of fire, grabs her, and drags her off. Of course, the Silvercups follow the trail of blood, only to discover and start shooting up the bench they're hiding behind, only to discover that none of them are there. So, yeah, of course, they do successfully get back to the Hollow House with the Silvercups not realizing that they've been hurt, not realizing that they gave them the slip, but they do discover that the squid lady is unfortunately dying because of the wound in her leg, which, being perfectly honest, I don't think that would happen. That would actually realistically happen. Like, if you got shot in the leg and you got immediate medical treatment, I'm pretty sure you would not die. But, but of course, she eventually succumbs to her wounds, explaining that she's happy that she finally got back to the base. Was able to hold out long enough to get back to the Hollow House, at which point she dies. And Zai, of course, is very grieves her loss because he's known her for a long time at this point. But of course, is upset that they were unable to successfully save her. But it's at this point where Zai and his crew start getting shot at and are knocked out one by one. At which point we discover that Skeleton is completely fine. And of course, he knocks everybody out, traps them all with silver cuffs, and then proceeds to explain that he is actually secretly an undercover with the Silvercups. I'm explaining that he doesn't want to be a Hollow. He essentially explains that he doesn't want to be a Hollow anymore, and that he's planning to use the money he's acquired to pay for a DNA replacement surgery to become a Wrath, and become a completely different person. Of course, he then proceeds to explain that he's been working with, and to that end, he's been working with the Silvercups for the better part of a year. I'm explaining that he's been kind of using all the money they've been stealing to secretly fund the Silvercups, and while also making his plans to turn the base into a condominium once he's done, with the Hollows and has effectively arrested and has effectively gotten what he's wanted. And of course, he immediately leaves to try and to get ready to go out about his master plan. But of course, Glen isn't going to take this standing down and not take this betrayal. So he immediately tries to get his silver cuffs off, which of course Zai points out is impossible because only a Silvercup can remove them. But of course, Glen tells him that he doesn't understand and that he's got this. At which point, he uses his latent Silvercup powers to successfully remove the cuffs from himself and starts to work on Zai as well. And of course, Zai is very visibly confused, pointing out that he didn't know that Glen was a Silvercup. And of course, Glen explains that he's not a Silvercup, but he used to be. At which point he explains his entire backstory up until that point, about how he was shot into space after getting accidentally shot in the foot by his Schlorpian neighbors. He wound up getting picked up by Silvercups and wound up joining the ranks. And then they betrayed him and tried to frame him for murder. And of course, he proceeds to point out that that the one thing he wants more than anything is to make them all pay for what they did to him. He wants to get revenge on obviously the Solars for launching him into space and shooting him in the foot, but also he wants to get revenge on the Silvercops for betraying him and trying to frame him for murder. And of course, everybody else is from the Hollow House is obviously very visibly upset with Glen, pointing out that they can't believe he used to be a silver cop. But of course, if Zai immediately understands and knows that Glen knows from first-hand experience what it's like to be a silver cop and why they should be hated, and that he would obviously hate them more than anybody because he knows what they're like. So, but of course, once Glen and Zai are free, they immediately decide to confront Skeleton. Even though they point out that they probably can't confront him on their own and need to free everybody else. But immediately realizing that Zai is right, they do proceed to confront Skeleton. He is in fact loading all of his loot into a duffel bag and is planning to escape. But they manage to chase him up to the roof. Although they can't find him once they get up there and assume he's fled. At which point Skeleton immediately attacks both of them, seemingly knocking out Zai and before turning his attention to Glen and almost knocking him off the roof. And of course, Glen is of course very visibly upset, pointing out that he invited everybody in and tried to inspire everybody and take them under his wing. But Skeleton points out that now he's inviting Glen to die. But of course, before he can knock Glen completely off the roof, Zai does a flying tackle into him and sends him off the roof instead. At which point his entire body just shatters upon hitting the ground because he's like mostly hologram. There's not a whole lot of organic matter in there. But of course, after immediately washing his remains into the sewer, they do decide to kind of honor their fallen comrade's dream and decide to convert the Hollow House into a bakery over the coming year. Which of course they point out which of course does wind up bringing a lot of success, and they are able to go straight and buy a bunch of they're of course, because they're able to go straight, they're able to bring in a bunch of money and do things legit. And of course Glen decides to hang around for the next year while they get themselves back on their feet. But of course does praise Zai for doing such a good job turning all of their lives around, pointing out that they just needed somebody to believe in them. And of course, Zai points out that he couldn't have done it without Glen, and also explains that to Glen that even though he knows that Glen's heart is probably set on revenge, he probably doesn't need it, pointing out that it would be better to just leave his life and be the person he wants to be. But and of course, Glen does decide to think about Zai's offer, but ultimately decides to leave Hollow House, which of course Zai is upset to find out that Glen has left, but understands completely what he's planning to do. At which point, Glen decides to go to that DNA rearranger person that he's met, and that Skeleton talked about, and of course does decide to undergo DNA surgery to become somebody else, so he can, which of course the Raft doctor that he meets with points out that there's a very good chance he won't be able to come back with us and not be able to return to who he used to be. But Glen just tells him to get it over with. At which point Glen is completely rearranged on a DNA level. But of course we then cut to the Silvercops recruitment office, where we do meet Glen in his new dog form, and he has turned himself into a buff dog alien. And of course, proceeds to inquire within the building about if this is where they join the academy to become a silver cop. Of course, the guy immediately points out that the guy sitting behind the desk points out that that it'll probably be the hardest 6 months of his life, and that there's no guarantee that he'll make it out alive. But points out that if he does, he'll get a sweet beret. And of course immediately asks Glen for his name, and Glen, realizing from the poster behind the guy that he's wanted and can't use his real name, decides to call himself Dodge Charger, which of course is obviously a reference, a car reference and a reference to Fast and the Furious as well, because since I think the main car used is a Dodge Charger. But of course, after the guy does call him out for making up his own name, but does point out that he's happy to have him aboard as the episode ends. So yeah, fun episode. obviously, I like the Silver Cup storyline a lot. The Silver Cup storyline is a lot of fun. But obviously, this storyline with Glen helping a group of thieves turn their life around. It's a fun episode. I do like it as an episode. It's fun. But yeah, and I also like that they are continuing like the storyline. They're trying to build up a new storyline because they know that the Wall one is probably coming to an end. Like I'm going to hazard that's probably what's happening. Like the Wall storyline is probably coming to an end because they're running out of things to do with it. I think probably. If I had to guess, that's probably the main reason they're setting up another storyline. Or that, or the fact that they have more episodes and are able to do more with it. Probably one or the other. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe both. I don't know. I don't really know because I'm not sure how the Wall storyline is going to end. But because every season is something different, where they try to create society and something falls apart. But it's obviously a fun episode. It is obviously the Silver Cup storyline. It's fun, and I am glad that they are able to play with that a little more. Like, I am curious where it's going to go from there, and I am interested to see where it pays off. But for now, that is going to do it for my review of Solar Opposites and the Silver Cups episode that's within the season. But what do you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below for updates. Be sure to check out my Twitch. We stream Saturdays and Sundays. I would appreciate if you were to check that out. We're currently streaming Ring Fit Adventure, which is my attempt to get fit and be in better shape. And also, Kingdom Hearts Rechain of Memories, because I'm just kind of playing through the Kingdom Hearts games because I like them. I'm enjoying them. They're a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm going to continue playing through them. I hope you guys will enjoy them as well. I'm having fun playing Rechain of Memories. Unfortunately, the first stream got a little messed up because I had an issue with OBS that I hopefully have fixed. If not, we'll know we'll know this weekend. But yeah, I hopefully have fixed whatever was wrong. But and also be sure to go. But in any case, also be sure to go check out my Discord. We hang out there sometimes. We watch movie watch-alongs when we finish streaming a series over on Twitch. So please go check that out. And be sure to go and check out the video, my Patreon. It helps support me, helps fund future projects. I would appreciate that. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.